Lord spake thus to me with a strong hand, and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people. Say ye not a confederacy to all them to whom this people shall say, a confederacy, neither fear ye their fear, nor be afraid. Sanctify the Lord of hosts himself, and let him be your fear, let him be your dread, and he shall be for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling, for a rock of offense.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. Continuing today in the book of Romans, the epistle of Paul to the Romans, in which he really lays out a lot of the important, not just lays out, but goes into great detail concerning the gospel and our salvation and what that all means. What is faith and how ought it be used? Faith is not for burying in the earth, as Christ indicated in the parable of the talents and of the pounds. Oh, a second here. Was it the pound? Anyways, there we go. All right, so we're going to pick it up at 28. But we're going to read, because we're going to read into chapter 2. I'm going to pick it up from actually after verse 15, I think. Though there's, like I said, when I read the intro, I reread it yesterday, and I thought, well, yeah, I could add more to it. Well, I think we got sufficiently from that. We're going to begin at verse 16 with the reading and continue into chapter 2 until I think it's good enough. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed, from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to become wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like unto corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness, to the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lusts one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meat. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Therefore, thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou art that judgest. For wherein thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself. For thou that judgest doest the same things. But we are sure that the judgment of God is according to truth against them which commit such things. And thinkest thou this, O man, that judgest them which do such things, and doest the same, that thou shalt escape the judgment of God? Or despisest thou the riches of his goodness, and the forbearance, or despisest thou the riches of his goodness, and forbearance, and long-suffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leadeth thee to repentance? But after thy hardness and impenitent heart treasurest up unto thyself wrath against the day of wrath, and revelation of the righteous judgment of God, who will render to every man according to his deeds, to them who by patient continuance in well-doing seek for glory, and honor and immortality, eternal life. But unto them that are contentious, and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation and wrath, tribulation and anguish upon every soul of man that doeth evil, of the Jew first, and also the Gentile. For there is no respect of persons with God. For as many as have sinned without the law shall also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another. In the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ, according to my gospel. Behold, thou art called a Jew, and restest in the law, and makest thy boast of God, and knowest his will, and approvest the things that are more excellent, being instructed out of the law, and art confident that thou thyself art a guide of the blind, a light of them which are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, which hast the form of knowledge and of the truth in the law. Thou therefore which teachest another, teachest not thyself? Thou that preachest a man should not steal, dost thou steal? Thou that sayest a man should not commit adultery, dost thou commit adultery? Thou that abhorrest idols, dost thou commit sacrilege? Thou that makest thy boast of the law, through breaking the law dishonorest thou God. For in the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you, as it is written, For the circumcision verily profiteth if thou keep the law, but if thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision. Therefore, if the uncircumcision keep the righteousness of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? And shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, I should say that more clearly, and shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, and shall not uncircumcision, which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee, who by the letter and circumcision dost transgress the law? For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh. But he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God. And that's the end of chapter 2. I guess when I get to the Behold thou art a Jew part, I thought I probably should stop here, but I was too interested in just hearing it again to stop. And also because my interest had been piqued based on verse 16, the first one we read. And I know I talked about Gentiles and stuff, and the Jew first, but also the Greek. I know I didn't mention the fact, sometimes it'll say the Jew and the Greek, but it doesn't mean just like Jews and Greeks, obviously. One more reason not to take the scripture literal, that's a figure of speech. The Greeks are put figuratively for all the Gentiles, because to the Jew, there really wasn't a difference. And he's speaking to the Romans, and Greeks and the Jews, they saw themselves as distinct. The Greeks knew the Jews somewhat despised them and looked down on them. And, Roman culture was quite a bit adopted from Greek culture. They had a higher culture than the Romans. The Romans were a little closer to being barbarians than the Greeks were, in the Greeks' estimation, certainly. And also in the Romans' own estimation, because they, on encountering Greek culture, they adopted it quite enthusiastically, many of the aspects of it, whereas the Hebrews did not. And the Romans would see much of what was part of their culture as being Greek. And that was to them fashionable, I think, at the time. I think, at this time. I know that at a certain time it was, but I'm trying to think of timelines and all that. But I haven't thought about Greco-Roman timelines in a long time. But anyways, that's true to some degree for sure. Just as some Jews were Hellenized, they became part of this Greek culture that had spread, and that the Romans themselves had adopted to a large degree and Romanized a bit. Because it was not purely Greek culture, but it was, the Romans saw it, they liked it, they adopted it. That's what the Romans tended to do. They were not, they were pretty open-minded in as far as adopting new ideas and also just, they would adopt people from other cultures and stuff. They'd use them as slaves, but also they would be they could be brought in as citizens, as Paul was a citizen. And since he was born, it must have been something from his family, his father or mother, who knows. Sorry, I should use the mute button. Okay. So that putting forward the Greek, we talked about when he singles out homosexuality. When he singles it out, but he doesn't really single out because he talks about all these other things. It's just one example. Like I said, where the nature of things that are seen says something about the divine nature. That's what Godhead means. God's divine nature. Now, God's divine nature has a lot of different aspects to it because, in one, we don't understand the full nature of God anyways, but we do understand what has been revealed. Or we try to understand. We have access to, and we can pray to understand. At least that which he has already said. Hold on 1 second here. So, when I talk about his nature, at least in this context, I'm not talking about things like, the Trinity. Or we might, maybe we have a disagreement about, or whatever. But I'm talking about things like Paul's talking about, and contextually that makes sense. When he says he showed them these things, his power, one, and his divinity. That means that there are certain aspects of his divine nature. And from the nature of God, we can kind of extrapolate an idea of right and wrong, because it is also revealed in us. We see somewhat of God's nature in our own nature, in our own sense, like Paul says, our conscience. Our conscience is the thing that bears witness. And that kind of gets into chapter 2. We got to finish chapter 1 first. But, chapter 1 here, we have this big list. All right. Of things. But first, wait. They did not like to retain God in their knowledge. It's like I said, it's like, think about God. He's got a righteous standard. He also has a lot of wonders if you think about it. There's more to, I always feel like, man, when you turn your back on God, are you sure you want to do that? A lot of times they think it's like, no, God can't be real. I'm like, well, maybe you don't have a proper formulation of who God is. I said, when I look at Jesus, when we did John, and I see his that he is he is severe. He loves, but he also has very definite ideas. You know what I mean? God is has very definite ideas about what's right, what's wrong, how things ought to be. And he doesn't like a lot of nonsense. He doesn't like people who play around at religion. Who play around, I mean in this sense of who are fake about it. I don't mean people who dabble and who are like curious and who play around with it like that. Meaning like, oh, I'm going to read the New Testament. Well, who knows? Maybe I'll believe this nonsense. I think that's, someone just giving it a chance is one thing. I'm talking about someone who's like, I'm a man of God, and they don't really believe, or to all, sometimes it's hard to tell. Like I said, you go ahead and Google atheist pastor. I remember telling atheists this, they didn't believe me. But it's like, it's all the time. Pastors coming out atheists to their congregation. I mean, I find that more disturbing than them coming out gay. I can understand gay. Gay is like a sexual sin. It's like it can happen. And also, I didn't really touch on the part about, like I said, I have had emails from people who suffer from this, and because I call it something you suffer from. Because like a lot of sins, it gets a hold of you. It takes possession of you. Whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. There's a servitude that comes with it. It binds you. And we understand, even science kind of understands like how it works chemically, even in your brain. There are these pleasure receptors. So like when you try to get away from certain things that give you pleasure, you become agitated, and it undermines your feelings of well-being and all that. It gets a hold of you and fills you with this false sense of pleasure that causes you to continually have to go back to that thing to feel normal, while never actually fulfilling anything except to satiate the desire. But but certain desires, not everyone likes, the same things. Not everyone has the same temptations. Some people have a greater and lesser desire for, carnal intimacy with other people, and people have greater and lesser issues with eating, and then people have issues with whatever, there's all kinds of, the way they treat other people, I've talked about all kinds of, we'll just go through all these. We'll go through all these. But we have this knowledge of God. But, I don't think it's per se a choice. We make choices along the way. Things that are indeed, we didn't have to go do that. You know what I mean? But we don't choose to find things tempting. I mean, if I have a special weakness, for anything, I want to think of something I don't have a weakness for. But I don't want to seem like I'm touting myself or whatever. But whatever. If one has a weakness for, say, the ladies or whatever, some people do not have, at least not to the degree that other people do. And people can, and I don't say that to excuse, like to accuse or excuse. But while we do sort of excuse, right? And when we do so, it sort of reveals ourselves, and I will excuse all others because I do not despise the mercy of God, which brings me to repentance. I'm willing to excuse anyone. That's not the point. The judgment of God is sure about these things. The point is we all need God's grace to be saved. That is his overall point. That's why he gets down to the Jew eventually, because he's saying, well, we know that this is the truth about God. That everyone's going to be judged by, hey, if you seek for glory and honor and power, there's eternal life waiting for you. But then he gets down to the people that are seeking it, that have the words, the law, or the gospel. I mean, to me, you can insert the gospel, because I check myself against everything in Scripture. I don't just look at myself, when I was doing the John, when I see him talking about you serpents, the offspring of vipers, I think about myself. I want to say, instead of being like, yeah, those Pharisees, they're such bad people. I'm not at all like them. If I had been in their days, I would have been one of those people following Jesus for sure. And I definitely would have, when they were crucifying him, I would have been on the side shaking my head, and saying no, or it's like, or what do we think? Who do we think we are? Are we really going? We don't know. We haven't been through anything. Peter, are you greater than Peter? I don't count. I mean, we know that we see him walk on the water and he doubted. We know that he denied the Lord. But also, the Lord, and many, and I hate to give credence to the Catholic position, but he seemed to be elevated above his peers a little bit. Or at least he had somewhat of a leadership role. Though, honestly, that isn't apparent in the book of Acts, right? Peter does his own thing, ultimately. He follows, like the Lord said to him. He said, what will this man do? And he said, you follow me. Because that ultimately, we each have our own path to walk. It's like, it's not necessarily, comparing ourselves to each other. I compare myself with who I was, not with who you are or someone else. I mean, I do like to look at the example of other people. That's one thing. But I mean, as far as comparisons can lead to envy, whereas it's how you look. It is. It's how you compare. It's not about because comparison can lead to envy in a certain way, I guess. I don't know. That's one of the things I don't have a ton of problems with. It's like envy is not one of my big weaknesses. And probably because I have a lot of gifts. If you have a lot of gifts, it's easy not to be envious. So I don't think it's particularly virtuous of me. If I was all, if I didn't have my intelligence, if I didn't have good looks, I discovered this a long time ago. If I hadn't had those things, I don't even have the spirit to hold up under that. At least not me, And maybe it's a byproduct of being spoiled with those gifts. As far as like I said, everyone's life is in its way challenging. That's why, people say, they talk about how rich people are unhappy. And they kind of despise them for that. Well, they should be happy. Well, why should they be happy? Just because they got all that money? It's easy to despise them. It's so easy that it makes me want to think mercifully toward and be gracious. Because it's like I said, and even though they may be absolutely despicable in many ways, some people who become spoiled through gifts, and especially through things like riches, it can cause us to be delusional about ourselves, having too much good thrown our way. Right? And then you think well, it's not because of God. It's because I'm special. But it can be challenging because that peace that only God can bring, the world will lie to you and tell you, well, if you had all the money you wanted, you'll have peace. If you have all that you ever desired, you'll have peace. If you have this, if you have that, if you possess this, if only this, if only that. And in the end, the peace that the world brings is never truly able to fulfill. Because as secure as you can be in the world, you're never really secure. We all receive that just recompense in ourselves, which is meat. We all do. But anyways, like I said, I don't think that it's genetic per se. Well, some aspects of our character are built into us, hardwired. What I'm saying is the tendency. What I'm saying is about homosexuality is a brokenness of the human condition. It's like, when someone looks, either it comes about through several ways, but it's usually through something happens along the way to the person to distort them. And I think it can be in the womb, hormonal. I've heard that suggested, and so I think that's I don't think having someone affected by a hormonal imbalance in the womb and having that make them turn out queer, essentially, that it makes them like that. Oh no, well somehow they can't be held accountable for their sins. Why is someone with poor impulse control held accountable for stealing? When someone who's just too afraid to steal, Meaning, there are some people who maybe would steal if they could, if they thought they couldn't get caught. Truth be told, I stole twice when I thought I couldn't get caught. I regretted it both times, but I shouldn't have stole. But this is when I was younger, and I wised up. I realized, even if I don't get caught, it stains my soul. And it's not that tempting to me. So why ever do it? You know what I mean? Why ever? So always, even in the smallest ways, at least for the most part. Like if I walk out of a store with a piece of merchandise on accident, I go back and I pay for it. But if like the checker makes a mistake and doesn't scan an item on me and I discover it when I get home, I don't. Because there's been times when I've why? Because then when it happens the other way around, I'll just take it on the chin and call it even. That's why. Because that's my own way of doing it. And then, and if I could talk to their executive, he'd shake hands and say, yeah, it's fine. It's just you can't deal sometimes with the stupidity in the world. It's just too complicated. It's easier to just move along. Some things are just happy accidents. I don't think for every, I don't, and there's the thing. It's a matter of conscience. Some people would say, no, Paul. I totally disagree with that. If you found it on your receipt, even if it's 2 weeks later, even if it's 15 cents, you go back and restore that. And maybe I don't feel like it's stolen. One, I didn't make the mistake. If I made the mistake, I actually would feel responsible. And, it would feel like I need to go back and pay for it. Yeah. But, I mean, if someone else makes a mistake, an employee of the store, and once I get home, at the register, I'll correct it. I might not even correct that at the car. That's just the honest truth. And maybe I don't think that's particularly wrong. Like I said, it's like most people consider that stuff just accident of life. It's like, I've lost change and other people have found it. Oh, well, So, a reprobate mind. What is a reprobate mind? I believe the word in Greek, what was it? I don't remember. A reprobate mind. Dokimos. Dokimos. Dokia, was that law or something like that? Oh, test. Dokos is like to test. Like, oh, that's interesting. So dokimos means to fail the test. It means rejected, right? Rejected, reprobate. So dokimos means like to approve. And so this means to reject. Usage means to failing to pass the test. Unapproved. Counterfeit. Let me see. Look at that. I'm curious what... I just want to click on Dokimos real quick. I just want to see. Is it used like for tempt? To test? To approve? Oh, they may be made acceptable or approved. That's the way it's kind of used normally. Those who are approved may be made manifest. That's like the passage from 1 Corinthians 11:19 that I cite a lot of times, without mentioning the verse number, because I don't remember the verse number. I used to try that stuff. I used to have I had the genealogy of Christ memorized. I had all the kings of Israel and the Adam and all that memorized, and even I think the lengths of their reigns, but it didn't last long because I couldn't retain it in my knowledge. That's the problem. When you memorize facts, you have to repeat them often. That's why the facts you repeat are things you tend to remember. Like if you write down your checking account number very often, you will tend to remember it. But but I don't remember old checking account numbers. I don't. Some people may, with exceptional memories. And that goes back to that differing gifts thing I was talking about. Okay, back to our text. A reprobate is someone who it indicates like an idea of a reject. Someone who's rejected. Of a rejected mind. The mind of someone who is not approved of God. Meaning a move, that is the mind of sin. To do those things which are not convenient. I want to know what that word is. I'm thinking expedient or good for you, essentially. What we got here? It's katheko, from like cathara, maybe Catherine and catheter from it, I believe. Means like clean or proper. Katheko, to be proper or fitting. Yeah, to do the improper things. Things that do not fit right. That's what I was talking about. That sin. And like I said, though one may be afflicted in the womb, Or along the way in life, a lot of times it happens when they're young. Someone does something to people and it messes with them and it causes them to be, their life to be forever altered along that path. Especially when you're young and your brain is still developing, it can interfere with your development. And people sometimes feel trapped in it and they don't know how to get out. And they say, how do I get out? It's like, how does one get out of any sin? It's like we must turn to the Lord continually. I've never found, and it's not like it's going to be necessarily a magical, instantaneous delivery. How badly do we want to be delivered? How badly? I always found that the more badly I wanted it, the more desperately I prayed, that and the more often, the better help I got. So it's like, if it's truly something that bothers you, because here's the thing, you can come to Christ just as you are. You don't have to change a thing about yourself to come to Jesus. You don't have to stop being gay, because that makes no sense. How could anyone else? Well, you do have to you have to stop the actions that you do. Yes, that you should at least agree to stop them. I mean, but you don't have to change your inner person on your own. That's not your. You can't change the things that are broken about yourself. I can't change the things that are broken about myself. Things that don't, like I said, it's sort of broken. It's like you should have a desire to put your organ where it technically belongs. That's the desire we should all come equipped with, so we go forth and use ourselves properly. And it's not necessarily you yourself. A lot of time, we have. There's an interesting thing where it says, God is very clear. He says, there was this saying that the parents have eaten the sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. He's like, you're not going to use that proverb in Israel, because it has to do with the fact that people noticing that sometimes parents do bad things and the children suffer for it. Right? Children suffer sometimes, like the children of alcoholics or people who grew up with narcissistic parents. There's or a parent who's narcissistic. There's different common things that happen when people are in certain situations. Right? And that, when people grow up under these circumstances, those things don't change in you and they become a part of you, but they become so deeply ingrained. It's not easy to just snap your fingers and just stop. That's why people find that it's very difficult to stop being gay, because it's so deeply embedded in either their childhood, maybe even their infancy. And while it isn't a choice to have those feelings, it is a choice to act on them. That is a choice. And that's what we must not do. I have feelings too about things I want to do that I do not do. And there are other things I have feelings about that I want to do that I shouldn't do that I do. And it's like sometimes it's hard to control it because a lot of times it comes on you a sudden. And one of the things I do is, in lieu of God's divine intervention to help me overcome a particular sin, I do everything I can to try to minimize my exposure to it, because that's all I can do in good conscience. So avoid, if there are places that I used to frequent. And then this happened to me when I became a believer. There were places I used to frequent where I was carried away with sin. And I stopped going to those places. I stopped going to those places, stopped hanging around with those people. And that's part of getting a new life. And then, if people have trouble, I can't stop my homosexual lifestyle. It's like, well, you may have to get out of the place where you're living it. A lot of times we act like we're just swept around with circumstances when we actually could control a lot of the circumstances around us. Anyways. But now you've got God in your mind. You've got God in your knowledge. You want to retain God in your knowledge. When you want to retain God in your knowledge, God isn't going to give you over to any kind of reprobate mind. Now that sounds kind of awful, like God gave them over. But again, He gives them what they want. You understand that God's grace and mercy usually comes to people, not usually, but very often comes to people who don't even want it. Like Paul the Apostle wasn't even looking for the grace. He sort of was in his way, but he wasn't looking for what happened. He wasn't looking for Jesus. He wasn't trying to find Jesus. He's trying to find Christians to persecute them and to drag them back to Jerusalem in chains to be tried. So he was not particularly, he was more on that Jewish side of things of like, I do all the things that are right in the law. and then in doing all that's right in the law, I persecute the church and commit murder. It's like, and so he understands that utter hypocrisy of like, there's someone who's like basically clothing themselves in white and saying they're a holy person, but at the same time doing some of the most awful things. And that's one of the things that by reason of whom the way of truth is evil spoken of, and by reason of whom the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles and among the unbelievers of the world because of these things. There are things, again, it goes to that wisdom which doing the fitting thing is wise. Like when they were confronted with Jesus, they should have bowed and been respectful. But that wisdom was hidden from them. So instead they crucified him. That was the hidden wisdom. It's described particularly like that. Like that, they would have noticed. You know why? Because that wasn't too good for them. Wasn't good, they didn't know what they were doing. He said, God forgive them. They know what they do. I don't know that it doesn't render them innocent. Like I said, there is a certain amount of innocence in ignorance. Because, meaning this, okay, they don't know how bad what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They just don't know how bad it really is the truth of it. I mean this, they know they're crucifying a man who's probably innocent. They don't care. But they don't know is that they're crucifying the Son of God. And if they knew that, they would behave differently. And so, at least on that front, maybe they've done, it could be said, they know not what they do. But on another level, they have no excuse. That's how it'll be judged. Because here's the thing. The part we are ignorant on, God could look at that ignorance. We are ignorant. But we also know. We're also without excuse. We have excuses, but they're not airtight. That's the problem. We have excuses. We have all of our reasons, right? Why'd you do it? Why'd you do it? You have an excuse? Well, he says we're without excuse. Anyway, so here are the sins. What happens when we don't retain God in our knowledge, when we reject God? When we're filled with all kinds of unrighteousness, right? Again, all unrighteousness doesn't mean you commit every single sin. Just like all men doesn't mean every single man comes in, but it means in that sense of every kind. Every kind of man, Jew, Greek, Chinese man, Russian, whatever. All those people are eligible. And all kinds of unrighteousness they commit. Not just that they do every single one. Fornication. Fornication is a word we don't use very much anymore, but it means sex outside of marriage. It is simply that. It should not be done. It is a sin. And it's very well accepted in every church, Actually, fornication, though, should be noted, is the Greek word pornos, from which we get our idea of pornography. It does not mean pornography. Pornography is pictures of fornication. And I've always said, I find it a bit of a marvel, because pornography is essentially legalized prostitution. Because people are being paid to have sex. They just bring cameras in and it's okay, I guess. Doesn't make sense. I think part of the problem, because like I said, it's like, well, on one hand, I don't need to control everybody else to be able to control myself. I don't need to be able to forbid everyone from accessing certain things. But they used to prevent people from producing certain kinds of, what do they call it, obscene materials. It was considered obscenity. It was not considered artistic or to have value. But the Supreme Court at some point decided, in some cases, they're like, well, who's to say what's art and what's not? And so then that whole consideration got thrown out. And so now we have a world that's just filled with pornography. And it's bizarre. Don't give your children smartphones. You know, they will have access to pornography. Their friends will show them how. And you say, well, how can they go to school? Well, I don't know. I don't know. Because I never had a phone my entire life till after I moved here, which is in the 2000. I think I got my cell phone in like 2003 or 4. Because I remember moving to the country and getting stuck once, having my car break down, and walking to somebody's house in the wintertime with 2 little boys. Boy, and I think about that now, I'm like, wow, how stupid was that? As far as the cell phone had existed at that point. You know what I mean? But fornication, wickedness, which word? Which Greek word is that for wickedness? Let's see. I'm just going to look it up right here without going to the page. It's poneria. Not porneria. Poneria. I guess I'm bringing it up. It's often translated wicked iniquity. Poneria is the Greek word, feminine. Definition, iniquity. Usage, wicked or iniquities. Cognate. Don't know what that means. Sorry. Under helps word studies. Poneria. Pain. Oh, yeah. Properly. Pain-ridden evil. Refers to pain. Ponos is pain, pure and simple. Again, it may come under the idea of evil as being toilsome. But here it says, under Strong's Concordance, depravity. Especially malice, plural, concretely plots, sins. And then it's only translated 2 ways in the King James. Iniquity or wickedness. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was on the right. There we go. It's only translated 2 ways. That's what I was just reading from. Okay. So, I don't want to belabor the point on every single word. Covetousness, we know that is. That is to desire things, to want to possess. Like I said, it does say covet the other gifts, desire those. There's a desire that is pure, a desire that is good, an aspiration, an ambition that is acceptable before God. Like it says, those who seek for glory. I seek glory. I'm a glory hound, man. But I want the glory that comes only from God. And, the glory that comes from men, well, those who seek it get it. They have their reward. They sought the glory of men and they found it, as is often the case. And you can, say, well, look out when all men speak well of you and they flatter you with their lips, because that's what they did to the false prophets, to paraphrase the Lord. So they did the false prophets. They're always on this. They always love the false prophets because the false prophets always say the things that please people. Not that the prophets can't be pleasing and speak comfortably. I think of Isaiah, all the beautiful words he had to say. Comfort you, my people. God can use his prophets to speak comfort. But it's the true comfort of God. Not the comfort that comes from saying, oh, just do whatever you want. It's okay. Anyways, covetousness. The covetousness is the quality of constantly desiring more in things, needing more. Or thinking you need more, but not really needing more. But that desire to have. Like you see someone else has something, you want it. Maybe you don't like it that they even have it. I don't know. I don't have a lot of those feelings. Like, I don't envy other people's gifts either. I want my own gift to shine before God. That's all I want. Whatever, I want to use the things God gave me for his glory and then receive glory from him. I want him to say, good job. That's glorious to me. I don't care if anybody sees it. You know what I mean? That's where we want to go. It's not about what men see. It's about what the Lord says. All that really matters is when you go to him before him, what he says to you. I don't see what anything else matters. I remember with a friend once, we were talking about, and I was saying like how I don't know why I ever really trouble myself too much about what people are thinking about me, because I know what I really want is to actually be Like they're not going to be there on the day of judgment judging me, is what I said. It's how I stand in the sight of the eternal eyes of God. Where do I stand? And I know I don't stand very well, except for the fact that the only reason I even think I have any standing is because of Jesus. Because all these things that afflict me, these are common. I definitely got my share of wickedness. That's all I know that one. I was a fornicator. Covetous, not particularly, but enough to steal twice in my life, right? Maliciousness. Sometimes, right? What is malicious? It's usually in English the quality of it's that feeling that we add to when we do something. Like if someone does something to us, there are malicious ways to retaliate. Harmful. Ways that hurt. I usually think in terms of the spirit in which it's done also. Like maliciously. Maliciousness, the quality of malice, having the quality of malice be the overriding principle of a thing is what I would consider maliciousness. But again, the word Greek is kakia. That's right, the word in Greek for bad is kaka. And this is kaka. It comes from kaka, the word that means bad. One of the words that means bad. Okay, they have many words like us: bad, evil, wicked, all that, iniquitous. Cognate kakia from 2554 kakopoyo. There's a different. When I say kaka, it's like there's a way that it's formulated that it actually does show up as kaka, but whatever. Anyway, a wicked disposition, properly the underlying principle of evil, inherent evil, which is present even if not outwardly expressed. So that's like that's why I said it's like when maliciousness is what drives you to slash someone's tires in retaliation secretly over something trifling. Not you per se, but one. You know what I mean? That feeling that drives someone to strike back harder. That was what drove Tubal-Cain. A man wounded me, so I killed him. That's malice. Evil in the heart. Depravity. In the lexicon here, because the Greeks use this word in a lot of ways, and so that's what the lexicon helps you do, understand the different ways. Like here it says even Hellenistically, evil or trouble. Kakos, badness, that is subjectively, depravity, or actively, malignity, or passively, trouble. It is probably good. It is evil, but that evil which is inside the human heart. I don't think it's like disaster or things like that. At least that's not what it seems. In fact, let me look over it real quick. You could probably rule that out. In malignity, wickedness, evil, or trouble. Well, trouble could be. Okay, yeah, so they do use it sometimes. But it denotes rather a vicious disposition, an active exercise of the same. It's not always, whatever, there's like argument going on between the scholars. That's why I don't get too into that. But whatever. Because like I said, we can be right without having all that. Because we know what evil looks like. We've seen it. We've felt it in ourselves. We don't always measure it properly either. Sometimes when someone does something to us that's not a big deal, because of our corrupt nature and our crooked thinking, we retaliate with something much worse, but we feel like it's equal. And I've seen people do that, where it's like they respond with much more force because they take the offense so great. You tapped me, it feels like a shove, because I'm important or something. They have compound sins. Their pride was injured also. Whatever. It all comes from not retaining God in your knowledge, because you don't think like, well, I have God to answer to. No, I don't. If I don't retain God in my knowledge, I have no one to answer to except perhaps the authorities. But if I can get away from with that, no one. And certainly, if things aren't illegal, that's why we have. You look at all the malice in this world. I see it all the times with like parents that seem to hate their children. You know, not all the time, but sometimes you see it. It's like they have a sort of malicious attitude towards the things. And they'll say they love them and they take care of them, but there's also this sort of like meanness going between them. Full of envy, murder, debate, deceit. Envy, again, envy one another can lead to covetousness and such things. Murder, of course. Now, every one of these, just like murder, fornication, all these forms have lesser forms. Like we know that adultery has lust. And lust, I think, is in here somewhere, essentially when you talk about covetousness. Coveting your neighbor's wife was one of the things you were forbidden from doing. So that is a kind of a lust. In fact, I didn't look up covetousness, but it's probably something like desire. Should I look at it real quick? I can just do the quick thing. It's pleonexia. It means like grasping, basically. Advantage, or here it says advantage, covetousness. Well, the idea of taking advantage, you know, grabbing everything. All right, full of envy, murder, debate. Now, it is not necessarily wrong to have. You know, I always was sort of like a little bit, I thought it was almost like a hard saying, like when it would say things like debate or like it would list those things as things we shouldn't have or do, because we are to earnestly contend for the faith. There's like the scriptures even say the Lord Himself says, "Come now and let us reason together. Their sins be as scarlet; they shall be white as wool." There is a willingness to talk, to discuss, to bring up objections. That's okay. But what is meant by debate? Let's see. Eris. I'm trying to remember if there was a Greek goddess of the same name that meant like contention or something. Eris. I don't know why that seems like why that struck me. But it isn't here in the lexicon, so I'm going to say no. Right? Contention, strife, or wrangling. And I think often sometimes we have to contend. Like, like when someone brings up falsehood, we have to bring it up. We have to fight it. And sometimes I've had people accuse me of being contentious for the sake of being contentious. Like I was just trying to argue. I'm like, well, no, I just have I have an issue with this, right? But I think it's more on the line of like, I think the idea of the strife that is engendered by having those variances between us. I mean, sometimes we don't agree, and it brings about strife. And a lot of times, the true roots of disagreement, no one wants to examine themselves very often to say, like, am I at the root of that? Is it my pride that's causing me to just, I'm not listening to anything that someone has to say? Is there some other motivation? And then this strife is coming about because of sin. Now, the other person might be involved in the strife, but it's not their fault. Strife comes about because of someone's fault. It could be, they'll say, oh, it's no one's fault sometimes. No, I think if it's no one's fault, then it's probably both their fault. Because you don't get into strife without someone being responsible. And quite possibly both. Especially if they both walk into it willingly. You know what I mean? There have been times when I kick off a striving, that's unnecessary. And like my wife could put a stop to it by just receiving it properly and by diverting me from I may have a bad, I'm like in a bad mental space, right? And I need to get my head right. Or she could fall into it the same way, and then now I've dragged her into the same foolishness. But she's still not, while I'm not, she's not responsible for me being how I am or for getting me out of it. But for enjoying it herself, she could be. At least, we don't want to do. I'm just saying, not as Christians per se, but just in a relationship between couples, and we're talking about what's right and what's wrong. Like, we are not required to get down in the mud and start slinging mud if our partner is having a bad day or something, And in fact, we owe it to them to keep our heads if we're not in the same space. If we're also weak and we're going to fall into it, well, then we're in for a day. We're going to have trouble in the home. And that's not good. But, but we should learn to work it out, and also to be strong on the behalf of the other one and understand when they may be under pressure, trying to be supportive and giving them space to, hold on. Giving them space to help them stay away from the sins that will crop up in the midst of all. I thought we'd get through all this. I'm like, 5 minutes left. Debate. So it's more of the striving of debate. It's not just the thing where we're like, well, let's discuss something. Let's talk about why we think this or why we think that. It is the striving of contention that it's not implied to be a quest for knowledge where we're like, well, let's learn. Well, on one hand, we have this and we have these points. Like if I talk about the millennium, I try not to be strifeful about it. I have my opinion. I'm a premillennial basically, right? Without being a dispensationalist. And so I when I talk about that, I try not to talk about it in a way that would create strife with people who disagree with me. And over time I've tried to use my words more and more like that, so that I can disagree and I can put forth the ideas that I think are true without creating strife in other people and thinking that somehow I'm not responsible for that. That the way I bring forth my argument, if I'm getting people reacting angrily at me, then, if I want them to hear me, if that's what I really care about, then I have to somehow figure out what it is I'm doing that's creating a reaction that's not necessarily, this shouldn't follow from just considering the facts. Like, I don't get angry if I was to, like, when I start reading someone, if they were going to try to explain to me, okay, here's why I'm an amillennialist, and they lay out all their case. That's not going to make me angry. Now, if they start insulting, saying people who are premillennial are obviously stupid. Now, I'm a little too old to fall for a debate on something like that. But let's say they start saying, people, you'd have to be a moron to think this. You'd have to da-da-da. And they start slipping in like digs that really aren't meant to convince. They may think it's convincing because to them it's like, well, it's convincing because you'd have to be stupid to believe anything else. So that's a convincing argument, but it's not. It's not really. It seems like it to the person thinking it at the time, but it's not really. Not actually. Anyway, so how we frame our words to our brethren, our family, it matters. Because we can create debate. We can create strife. And then when we see them react to it, we can be, aha, look at what they do. But we're not really being responsible for our role. And like I said, I always look at first my role. I got to get the beam out of my eye before I can start pecking around at other people's specks, Even if I regard what's in my eye as a speck. You ever had a speck in your eye? Let me tell you, it can be quite distracting and keep you from seeing straight. You know what I mean? Like, so I know, I still have specks, so I know I still don't see as clear as I should. I don't believe I got a lot of beams in my eye. Sure, I confess, I'm vain enough to think I don't got beams in my eyes, though I could, but again, if I'm blind to it, what am I going to do? Except God reveal it to me. Some people probably think I do have a beam in my eye. Like say, well, Paul, obviously, as an annihilationist, can't you tell that that's a giant beam in your eye of false doctrine? It's like, well, no, because I think it's right. But then again, and I haven't gone about this recklessly or carelessly or without, consideration. I've wanted to get things right my whole life, Like I said, I got no books to sell. Maybe someday I will have a book to sell. That's a book to me. Selling a book is like, well, if you write a book, I'd probably just publish it because my point of making books is not to sell them, but for people to read them. So I'd probably just put them on electronically, like I do everything else I do. But I might also publish a book and make it available for free, just like I do with the music, where I publish it and make it free. Malignity, that which is malign. Is that what the Greeks have in mind? Let's find out. Malignity. Think about malignant cancer, right? Kakothea. That's a lot like kakia. Except instead of maliciousness, it's things that are malignant, destructive. Here, according to this, the definition is malevolent. Kakiothea. It's a female noun, so I guess it makes personifies evil. Again, the gender of noun, don't be confused by that. It's very little to do with the anything else. Anyways, evil-mindedness, malignity, malevolence. Cancer is malignant when it's destructive and it grows, and it's benign when it's not actually doing any harm, right? And that's what people become filled with, harmful things, destructive things. And so I see people, they say they love their family, but they do things constantly to destroy them. I get reports, and it's not surprising. Why do children have strife with their families? Why? Well, they've been at school their entire life. Their real life is at school. That's their real family. And that one's a sick, dysfunctional one too. Not to mention the one at home where they don't, feel connected and they never, because mom and dad are just so busy, and it's like, now, because the thing that happens is when they're children, they're kind of in their little child world playing, but then they grow up into adults, and the adults don't always connect with them properly. And how could they? They're away from them, sometimes 12 hours a day. What kind of relationship can you forge with a child that you see just for an hour or two a day? Well, I'll tell you what, you better work it. Otherwise, there won't be anything. And yeah, there's going to be disagreement because a lot of things we believe in, they seem arbitrary. What should and shouldn't be, what's right and what's wrong. It's not going to be immediately obvious to someone, to accept a father's wisdom. The child must respect their father and listen and think like, I should listen to dad because he's usually right. And not feel embarrassed or ashamed or feel like there are peers that they have to please over their parents. Whisperers. That reminds me of backbiters. There's always things to whisper about. And that so leads to things like backbiting. People love to whisper. Oh, shh. Let me tell you something. Let me tell you about so-and-so. Let me gossip about so-and-so. It starts with gossip and then it turns to backbiting, because that's where you're starting to hurt people, stabbing them in the back type ideas. Now I don't know if that's correct there with verse 30, and we're out of time, but I'm going to check it real quick here. I got the hiccups. I'm enjoying this passage. This is very ideas, and it's funny that we haven't gone anywhere. But we will tomorrow, Monday, I'm sure. Whisperers is piss. I can't pronounce it. It's got a P-S-I-T-H in it. That's one of those words. Look at this. I can't say that. My tongue hasn't been trained. I think you have to grow up Greek to be able to say that word. Let's see if we can try it. Again, this first look at the phonetic spelling. Okay? It looks like I'm gonna say Sith. Yeah, there you go. Sithurites. You know what? Never mind. It means properly a whisperer, a sneaky gossip, quote unquote backstabber, backbiter. Wait a second. That drives me. I hate when they do that. It's translated. Okay, here we go. A secret calumniator. I like Strong's word. I remember looking calumniator. Calumny is a very grave and false accusation. Calumny. A calumniator is one who makes. It's like worse than a false accuser. It's like. It's like an order of magnitude worse, right? So that's what he says. And so it's funny that says backbiter, right? And then what's the next word? Backbiter. Okay, so what's that mean then? Like I said, they probably are related words, right? And again, we don't have to get them perfectly right to understand their meaning. Backbiters. Though I'm looking them all up anyways, just because I hate to say something and then it's not right. Even though I can be right without having that information, but still. One who defames, a defamer. Katalalos, slanderous, backbiting, a railer, defamer. I think this is a little more public. They call it backbiting here. In the King James, they translate it backbiter. Katalaleo. And that's a very simple construction. Even I have enough knowledge in Greek to put that together. Because laleo just means like to talk. And kata means against. It can be, but it means talkative against a slanderer. That means publicly speaking against. So, backbiter is a terrible translation of this word. King James, you let us down, okay? People say it's a perfect translation. I disagree. It's backbiters and slanderers. Because the other one was more of backbiters. This is a slanderer. This is public defamation. Okay? So, King James did not get it right there. I hope I don't make people angry who are King James only, but again, I don't, like I said, I usually try to craft it so it doesn't offend people. But on the other hand, I do think there are points to point out. It's like, well, that's not a great translation. There are many other places that are worse. I love the King James, but it's just not. The idea that it's perfect is a weird belief because God, who gave you this information? Is this a special revelation from God? Well, let me tell you this. I can clearly see by the things that are made, by the nature of the creation, by God's divine nature and power, that that's just not true. Because the words themselves speak against it. I can go to the original languages, Greek, and we can see, because this is Paul. It's not Hebrew. Haters of God. No need to. I wonder if that's one word. That's the only thing I'm curious about. I bet it's one word in Greek. Haters of God is, Theostouges. That's funny. Stooges. That's funny. That in Greek, people who hate God are called Theostouges. Right? They're not called atheists. They're called Theostouges. They're stooges. I just thought that was funny. Theostouges. They just need to double that. Change that O to a double. Change that U to a double O, and you got it. And I'm sorry. It's just too convenient. I don't genuinely believe they're all stooges. Of Theos, God, and Stigio, abhor. To abhor God or his will. This rare term refers to people who totally turn against the Lord. Yeah, well, that's the point. They hate God. But again, that just says what happens to people naturally through sin. Through not retaining God in their knowledge. They begin to hate God. Because they know everything that God reveals to them that he stands for. They mean they don't have to actually know, like Jesus said, when they were going to kill him, he said, "Now they have seen and hated me and my Father." Why? Because all the time he was saying they don't have eyes to see, they can't understand who I am, all this, right? They couldn't see him. They didn't have the wisdom to know who he was. Yet they saw him. What does that mean? Well, they didn't see the Son of God, but they saw a righteous man. They didn't hear the words of God, but they heard words of righteousness and all the immorality, right? They heard all that BS that they don't believe in, about doing the right thing and all, it's like, please, I think this is not the word of God, it's the word of your grandma, okay? Granny says, don't do this, don't do that. Well, that's BS. We do whatever we want. And this guy, he doesn't matter. Watch, we don't even think he's guilty of anything. We're going to crucify him anyways, just to please these a-holes. Just like the unjust judge. Hey, it's importune. You got to die. Because that's why Pilate crucified Jesus for importunity's sake. That's why. He knew he was an innocent man. He didn't particularly want to, but because of the inconvenience of the Pharisees, essentially, because they wanted it so bad, he gave them their desire. Haters of God. And they don't think they hate God. Again, they think, oh, we love God. I'm a Jew. I love God. I wear all the clothes. I make my boast in God, like Paul goes on to say, right? But they don't really love God. That's why I say there are people out there preaching Jesus who hate Jesus. Because when we talk about the real Christ, like when I talk about things like predestination, I get people who get angry. Don't get angry. Because you're not angry with me. You're angry with God. He's the one that gives them up to vile affections. He could stand in the way. He does not. You say, well, it's all right. Well, he did for me, though. He stood in my way. He stood in the Apostle Paul's way. He was merciful to me. Why not be merciful to them? Why not be merciful to everybody? Well, he was merciful to everybody. He sent his son. Yeah, he did. But what about, but only people that he benefits are those that believe. And if you don't believe, how do you believe? How do you get to the point where you believe? Are there enough convincing arguments? If there were, then everyone. If it was a question of the convincingness of the argument, then all the smartest people would believe. They would. It would be all the smartest people. They would listen to this perfect argument for Christianity, for God, and they'd hear the wisdom thereof, and they'd, because it's a question of just crafting the clearest, most perfect argument. And I mean case for Christ. But not so. Not so. They hate the truth when they hear it. They hate God when they see him. They don't know that it's God they're hating, but they hate him anyways. See, that's the point. They see the things of God. They're manifest to them. But they don't say, it's God. Righteousness belongs to God. Truth. No, what they honor are lies. What they honor are deceits. What they honor is fornication and wickedness and envy. That's what they honor, and they put at the center of their lives. That's what their gods consist of. Haters of God. Well, we've got to quit. There's just no two bones about it. I got to be done. It's almost 11. All right, and this went over. So thanks for joining me in this study. We will pick up in the middle of that verse, whatever, on Monday, and we will get into chapter 2, I hope and expect. Until then, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to being back again on Monday.
For the Lord spake thus to me with a strong hand, and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people. Say ye not a confederacy to all them to whom this people shall say, a confederacy, neither fear ye their fear, nor be afraid. Sanctify the Lord of hosts himself, and let him be your fear, let him be your dread, and he shall be for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling, for a rock of offense.